The message came at 3 in the morning when most of the world was sleeping. Every screen on Earth suddenly went dark and then lit up again with the image of something that was not human. The creature looked like it was made of living crystal and light, and it floated in a chamber that seemed to stretch forever into darkness. Its voice came through speakers in every language at once, and it spoke with the kind of coldness that made children cry and grown men feel small. "Species designation human," the creature said. "I am Ambassador Zilveth of the Galactic Council, and I speak on behalf of the 412 civilizations that rule this galaxy. Your kind has been observed for the past 200 years since you first discovered how to travel faster than light. You have been measured. You have been studied. And you have been found unworthy of existence." In Washington, President Henry Cole was pulled from his bed by Secret Service agents who rushed him to the Situation Room beneath the White House. His wife, Patricia, was already there because she served as the Secretary General of the United Nations, and she had been woken even earlier. They stood together watching the alien on the massive screens, and they held hands without realizing they were doing it. "Your ships pollute our sacred transit lanes," the alien continued. "Your radio signals contaminate frequencies that have been silent for 10,000 years. Your colonies spread like disease across worlds that were meant to remain empty. You build weapons when you should build temples. You fight among yourselves when you should kneel before your betters. You are loud and violent and short-lived, and you breed like insects." Henry looked around the room at the generals and admirals who had gathered. He saw Admiral Nathan Price standing in the corner with his arms crossed and his face completely calm. Nathan was 70 years old and had spent his entire life in the military, and he had seen things that would break most men. But even he looked troubled by what he was hearing. "The Galactic Council has therefore decided that humanity must be contained," the alien said. "You will have 12 of your days to comply with the following demands. First, you will destroy all vessels capable of traveling faster than light. Second, you will abandon your 3 colony worlds and return all humans to Earth. Third, you will submit to population reduction protocols that will decrease your numbers to a manageable level of 500 million. Fourth, you will dismantle all weapons capable of reaching beyond your atmosphere." Patricia felt her heart stop. Population reduction to 500 million meant killing over 7 billion people. It meant genocide on a scale that made every horror in human history look like nothing. "If you do not comply," the alien continued, "the Council will sterilize your world. Every city will burn. Every ocean will boil. Every trace of your civilization will be erased until Earth is nothing but a dead rock spinning around a dying star. This is not a negotiation. This is not a discussion. This is a courtesy notification, so that you may spend your final days making peace with whatever gods you believe in." The screen went dark for exactly 5 seconds. Nobody in the Situation Room moved or spoke or even breathed. Then everyone started talking at once. Generals shouted about military options. Diplomats talked about opening communications. Scientists argued about whether the threat was even real. The noise grew louder and louder until Patricia slammed her hand on the table and the room fell silent. "Admiral Price," she said, "you have been running the Deep Space Defense program for 30 years. Everyone said you were paranoid. Everyone said you were wasting money on weapons we would never need. Tell me you have something." Nathan stepped forward, and his calm expression did not change. He pulled a small device from his pocket and pressed a button, and the screens lit up again. But this time, they showed something different. They showed shipyards hidden in asteroids. They showed weapons platforms concealed in the rings of Saturn. They showed fleets of vessels that no one outside of the highest security clearances had ever seen. "Madam Secretary," Nathan said, "I have been preparing for this day since I was 25 years old. My father prepared before me, and his father before him. We always knew that the universe was too big and too old for us to be alone, and we always knew that whatever was out there might not be friendly. Henry stared at the images on the screen. How many ships? 247 combat vessels, Nathan replied. 53 support ships, 12 carriers, and weapons that we have never tested because we never had a target worthy of them. Can we win? Patricia asked. Nathan was quiet for a long moment. I do not know, he admitted. The Council has ruled this galaxy for 50,000 years. They have technology we cannot imagine. They have numbers we cannot match. By every logical calculation, we should surrender and hope for mercy. But, Henry prompted, but I have studied every species that ever made contact with the Council. I found records hidden in signals that were never meant to be heard. And I learned that every single species that surrendered to the Council was eventually destroyed anyway. The Valkyrie surrendered and were exterminated within a century. The Torvan Empire negotiated and were absorbed into slavery. The Kreeth begged for mercy and were hunted to extinction for sport. He looked around the room at the men and women who held the fate of humanity in their hands. Surrender is not survival, he said. It is merely delayed death. If we are going to die, then I say we die fighting. I say we show this Council that humanity does not kneel. I say we make them remember our name for the next 50,000 years, even if we are not alive to hear it. The room was silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of decision. It was the silence of people who had just realized that they were standing at the edge of history. Patricia looked at her husband, and he looked back at her. They had been married for 30 years, and they did not need words to communicate. She saw the fear in his eyes, but she also saw something else. She saw determination. She saw the same stubborn refusal to quit that had carried humanity from caves to the stars. Admiral Price, she said finally, you have 12 days. Show me everything. Nathan smiled for the first time since the message had arrived. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had waited his entire life for a fight and had finally found one worthy of his preparation. With pleasure, Madam Secretary, he said. With absolute pleasure. And so began humanity's answer to the Galactic Council. Not with surrender. Not with fear, but with the cold and quiet determination of a species that had crawled out of the mud and climbed to the stars through nothing but stubbornness and spite. The Council had given them 12 days to submit. They would use every single hour of those 12 days to prepare the greatest surprise the galaxy had ever seen. The Galactic Council had ruled the galaxy for 50,000 years, and in all that time, they had never once encountered a species that did not respond to their ultimatum. Some begged, some threatened, some tried to negotiate. But all of them responded because the fear of extinction was a universal constant that crossed all boundaries of biology and culture. Humanity did not respond. For 3 days, the Council waited. High Counselor Mavroth, a being of pure energy contained within a shell of magnetic force, grew increasingly agitated as the silence stretched on. He called emergency meetings. He consulted with the greatest strategic minds in the galaxy. He demanded explanations from his intelligence officers, but none of them could explain why the humans had simply gone quiet. Perhaps they are paralyzed by fear, suggested Delegate Oryx, a massive creature that looked like an insect the size of a horse. Primitive species often require time to process the reality of their situation. They are probably still arguing among themselves about how to respond. Or perhaps they are preparing their surrender, added Counselor Vex, a being that resembled a cloud of living smoke. They know they cannot win. They are simply gathering the courage to admit it. But one voice in the chamber disagreed. Ambassador Kethra was a reptilian diplomat who had spent 30 years observing humanity from a hidden station near the planet they called Saturn. She had watched them build and fight and die and create. She had studied their history and their art and their weapons. And she had learned something that the rest of the council had never bothered to understand. "You are making a mistake," she said, and her voice cut through the noise of the chamber like a blade. "I have watched these humans. I have seen what they do when they are threatened. They do not freeze. They do not beg. They build. They plan. They prepare. And when they are ready, they strike with a fury that defies all logic." The council laughed at her. They had conquered 412 species across 100,000 worlds. What could one primitive civilization possibly do against such power? "Send the enforcement fleet," High Counselor Mevrath ordered. "If the humans will not respond to words, then they will respond to force. Show them what happens to species that ignore the council." Fleet Commander Voshra received his orders and assembled 47 warships for the journey to human space. Each vessel was the size of a small city and carried weapons that could reduce continents to ash in seconds. The fleet had participated in 63 planetary subjugations and had never lost a single engagement. They expected the human campaign to be over within hours. The fleet arrived at the edge of the human solar system and immediately scanned for enemy vessels. They found nothing. The human ships that had been observed patrolling the system were gone. The orbital stations around Earth were empty. Even the colonies on Mars and the moons of Jupiter appeared to be abandoned. "Where are they?" Voshra demanded. They had over 200 ships. Vessels that size cannot simply disappear. His sensor officer checked and rechecked the readings. "I am detecting no human vessels within scanning range, Commander. It is as if they have simply vanished." Voshra felt something he had not experienced in centuries of warfare. He felt uncertain. He felt almost afraid. But he pushed those feelings aside because fear was for lesser beings, and he was a commander of the Galactic Council. "Proceed to Earth," he ordered. "If they will not come to us, then we will go to them." The fleet moved deeper into the solar system. They passed the outer planets and the asteroid belt and the red planet, the humans called Mars. And with every passing hour, the silence grew heavier. No communications. No resistance. No sign of life at all, Dodd. Then the first ship went dark. Dodd, it happened without warning. One moment the cruiser Dominance was fully operational, and the next moment every system on board failed simultaneously. Lights went out. Engines died. Weapons powered down. Life support began to fail. The crew of 3,000 found themselves drifting helplessly in the void. Before Voshra could react, a second ship went dark. Then a third. Then a fourth. Across the fleet, vessels began to die one by one, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. No enemy was visible. No weapons fire was detected. It was as if an invisible hand was simply reaching out and turning off each ship like a light. "What is happening?" Voshra screamed at his officers. "Find the source of the attack." But there was no attack to find. The humans had spent 60 years developing a weapon specifically designed to defeat Council technology. They had studied every ship that passed through their system. They had analyzed every signal and every frequency and every shield harmonic. And they had built electromagnetic pulse devices that could shut down Council vessels from a distance of 1,000 kilometers. By the time Voshra understood what was happening, his own flagship was beginning to fail. The lights flickered and died. The engines groaned and went silent. And then, in the darkness between the stars, the human fleet appeared. They came from everywhere at once. From behind asteroids and moons and the blind spots that Council sensors could not detect. 247 vessels emerged from hiding and surrounded the crippled Council fleet like wolves circling wounded prey. Captain Lisa Parker stood on the bridge of the USS defiance and watched the enemy drift helplessly before her. She was 43 years old and had spent her entire adult life preparing for this moment. Her father had been one of the engineers who designed the EMP weapons. Her mother had been one of the intelligence officers who mapped Council patrol routes. She had been born into this war, and she intended to win it. "Open a channel to the enemy flagship," she ordered. The screen flickered to life, and she saw Vashra for the first time. He was a creature of scales and claws and cold eyes, and he looked at her with a mixture of rage and disbelief that almost made her smile. "Commander Vashra," she said, "your fleet is disabled. Your crews are unharmed, but your ships will remain non-functional until we choose otherwise. You will deliver a message to your council." "You dare to threaten the council?" Vashra snarled. "You are nothing but insects. You are a footnote in galactic history." Lisa leaned forward, and her eyes were as cold as the void between stars. "We are the species that split the atom and used it to end a war," she said. "We are the species that walked on our moon within a decade of deciding to try. We are the species that looks at the impossible and says, 'Watch me.' And now we are the species that is coming for your masters. Tell them we remember every world they burned. Tell them we found the survivors they tried to exterminate. And tell them that humanity does not forgive and humanity does not forget." She cut the channel and turned to her crew. "Set course for the Council homeworld," she ordered. "It is time to finish this." The journey to the Council homeworld took 7 days, and during that time, the galaxy began to change. Word of the human victory spread faster than any ship could travel. It moved through hidden communication networks that had existed for centuries, passed from species to species in whispers and coded signals that the Council had never detected. On a frozen moon at the edge of known space, a colony of Velkari survivors received the news. They were the last of their kind, fewer than 10,000 individuals who had hidden in the ice for 300 years after the Council destroyed their homeworld. Their leader, an elder named Crystalline Voice, listened to the transmission and wept tears that froze before they could fall. "They did it," she whispered. "The young ones from the blue world actually did it." In the deep caverns beneath a dying star, the remnants of the Torvan Empire heard the same news. They had once ruled 1,000 worlds before the Council reduced them to a few 100,000 refugees living in the dark. Their commander, a massive warrior named Stonefist, gathered his people and spoke words that had not been spoken in generations. "Prepare the ships," he said. "The time of hiding is over." And in 1,000 other hidden places across the galaxy, species that had been hunted and broken and nearly destroyed began to stir. The humans had found them all over the past 2 centuries. They had sent secret envoys to every survivor colony. They had offered shelter and weapons and something far more valuable than either. They had offered hope. Captain Lisa Parker knew none of this as the Defiance led the human fleet toward Council space. She knew only that her orders were clear and her mission was simple: disable the Council's defenses, secure their homeworld, and deliver a message that the galaxy would never forget. But the Council was not idle during those 7 days. High Counselor Mevrath had received the transmission from Commander Vashra and had immediately begun mobilizing every ship in the realm. 3,000 warships converged on the homeworld. Defense platforms that had not been activated in millennia powered up and aimed their weapons at the stars. The Council had ruled for 50,000 years, and they did not intend to fall to a species that had barely learned to walk upright. "Let them come," Mevrath declared to the assembled Council. "We will show them what true power looks like. We will remind the galaxy why the Council is eternal." But Ambassador Kethra watched the preparations with growing dread. She had tried to warn them. She had told them that humanity was different. And now she saw something in the sensor data that made her blood run cold. "High Counselor," she said, "the human fleet is not alone. Mavrath turned to her with irritation. Explain. Look at the signatures approaching from the outer rim. Those are not human vessels. Those are Velkari crystalline ships. And coming from the galactic core, those are Torvan dreadnoughts. From the nebula sectors, Kreeth scout wings. From the dead zones, Moxar carriers. From the twilight regions. She stopped because the list was too long to continue. Across the galaxy, ships were emerging from hiding. Species that had been declared extinct were revealing themselves. And they were all heading to the same place. Impossible, Mavrath said. We destroyed them. We hunted them to extinction. There are no survivors. You were wrong, Kethra replied. You thought you killed them all, but you only killed most of them. And the ones who survived have been waiting and planning and building for this moment. The humans found them. The humans united them. And now they are coming for us? The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Council system and immediately began transmitting on all frequencies. Galactic Council. Admiral Nathan Price said from the bridge of the command ship, "This is Admiral Nathan Price of the Earth Defense Force. You threatened our world with extinction. You gave us 12 days to surrender or die. I'm here to give you our answer." Behind the human fleet, more ships began arriving. Crystalline vessels that seemed to be made of living ice. Massive dreadnoughts covered in ancient runes. Swift scout ships that moved like predators. Carriers the size of moons. Within an hour, the human fleet of 247 vessels had grown to over 3,000. We have come for justice, Nathan continued. Not revenge. Not conquest. Justice. For the Valkyrie, who you exterminated for daring to create beauty. For the Torvan, who you enslaved for refusing to kneel. For the Kreet H, who you hunted for sport. For the 100 species whose names have been erased from history. We remember them, we speak for them, and we will not be denied. The Council fleet moved to intercept, and the two armadas faced each other across 1,000,000 kilometers of empty space. It should have been a simple calculation. The Council had 3,000 ships with 50,000 years of military experience. The Allied fleet was a patchwork of different species who had never fought together before. By every logical measure, the Council should have won, but logic failed to account for something that the Council had never understood. It failed to account for the fury of the oppressed. It failed to account for the strength of those who have nothing left to lose. And it failed to account for the sheer stubborn determination of a species that had crawled out of the mud and refused to stop climbing. The battle lasted 6 hours. The Allied fleet used tactics that the Council had never seen because they came from 100 different military traditions. Valkyrie ships created ice shields that absorbed energy weapons. Torvan dreadnoughts used ramming attacks that sacrificed themselves to take out larger targets. Kreeth scouts moved so fast that Council targeting systems could not track them. And through it all, the human ships coordinated everything with a precision that should have been impossible. Captain Lisa Parker fought on the front lines. She watched friends die and enemies burn, and she never stopped giving orders. When her ship took critical damage, she transferred to another vessel and kept fighting. When that vessel was disabled, she led a boarding party onto a Council cruiser and captured it from the inside dot. By the end of the 6th hour, the Council fleet was broken. Half their ships were destroyed. A quarter were disabled. The rest were retreating in chaos. And the Allied fleet was descending on the Council homeworld like judgment itself. High Counselor, one of the officers reported, "Our defenses have failed. The enemy is landing troops on the surface. They will reach the Great Chamber within the hour." Mavrath stared at the reports, and for the first time in his ancient existence, he felt something he had never experienced before. He felt afraid. "How?" he whispered. "How could this happen? We are the Council. We are eternal." But no one answered because there was no answer to give. The council had ruled through fear and domination for 50,000 years. They had never considered that their victims might one day unite against them. They had never imagined that a young species from a small blue world might be the spark that lit the fire of rebellion. And now that fire was burning everything they had built to ash. The great chamber of the Galactic Council had stood for 27,000 years. Its walls were made from the compressed remains of the first species the Council had conquered, transformed into a black stone that absorbed all light. Its floor was paved with crystals harvested from the cores of dying stars. Its ceiling stretched so high that clouds formed in the upper reaches and occasionally released rain onto the delegates below. It was designed to make anyone who entered feel small and insignificant and afraid. Admiral Nathan Price walked through the massive doors and felt none of those things. Behind him came 500 soldiers from a dozen different species. Human Marines in powered armor marched alongside Velkari warriors whose crystalline bodies reflected the dim light. Torvan shock troops carried weapons that had been hidden for centuries. Kreeth scouts moved through the shadows with a silence that was almost supernatural, and representatives of 100 other species followed, each one carrying the memory of what the Council had done to their people. The chamber was full. Every surviving member of the Council had gathered here, either to make a final stand or to witness the end of their civilization. 412 species had once ruled this galaxy through fear and domination. Now they sat in their ancient seats and watched their conquerors approach with expressions that ranged from terror to disbelief to something that might have been relief. High Counselor Mevrath stood at the center of the chamber, his energy form flickering with agitation. Around him, his personal guards formed a protective circle, but they made no move to attack. They had seen what happened to those who resisted. They had watched their fleet burn and their defenses crumble and their power evaporate like morning mist in the sun. "This is impossible," Mevrath said as Nathan approached. "We are the Council. We have ruled for 50,000 years. We cannot fall to primitives and refugees." Nathan stopped 10 meters from the High Counselor and looked at him with eyes that had seen too much death to be impressed by ancient power. "Every empire falls," he said. "Every tyrant is eventually overthrown. You ruled through fear because you had no other foundation. You crushed anyone who might challenge you because you knew that your power was built on nothing but violence. And now that violence has come home, we brought order to the galaxy," Mevrath protested. "Before the Council, there was chaos. Species warred against each other constantly. Billions died in meaningless conflicts. We ended that. We created peace." "You created silence," Nathan replied. "You killed anyone who disagreed with you and called it peace. You enslaved entire civilizations and called it order. You exterminated species for the crime of being different and called it progress. That is not peace. That is a graveyard." A Valkyrie elder stepped forward. Her name was Crystalline Voice, and she was the last of her people's leaders. Her body was made of living ice that had survived 300 years in exile, and she looked at Mevrath with ancient hatred. "Do you remember the Valkyrie?" she asked. "We were artists and musicians and poets. We created beauty that made other species weep with joy. And you destroyed us because our art made your propaganda look hollow. You burned our homeworld and hunted our survivors and declared us extinct. But we survived. We hid in the ice and we waited and we never forgot." A Torvan warrior stepped forward next. His name was Stone Fist, and he was the commander of what remained of his people's military. His body was covered in scars from centuries of running and fighting and surviving. "Do you remember the Torvan?" he demanded. "We were builders and engineers and explorers. We created wonders that spanned star systems. And you enslaved us because you feared what we might build if we remained free. You worked us to death in your mines and your factories and your shipyards. But we survived. We escaped into the darkness, and we built new ships, and we never forgot. One by one, representatives of the destroyed species stepped forward. Each one told their story. Each one named what the council had taken from them. And with each testimony, the weight of 50,000 years of atrocities pressed down on the chamber like a physical force. Finally, a young human woman stepped forward. Her name was Karen West, and she had spent her entire life studying the history of the council's victims. She carried a data device that contained the records of every species the council had destroyed. "This is the truth of your empire," she said. 743 species completely exterminated. Over 200 enslaved and eventually worked to extinction. Countless billions dead. And for what? So that you could feel powerful? So that you could sit in this chamber and pretend that you were gods? She activated the device, and holographic images filled the chamber. Burning worlds. Mass graves. Execution chambers. Slave markets. The evidence of 50,000 years of horror played out before the council members, and many of them could not watch. "We have shared this record with every species in the galaxy," Karen continued. "Every world, every station, every ship. The truth of what you did can never be hidden again. Even if you somehow defeated us today, your legacy would remain. Everyone would know what the Galactic Council really was." Meverith, as form, flickered and dimmed. He looked around the chamber at the other council members and saw something he had never seen before. He saw doubt. He saw fear. And in some faces, he saw agreement with the words being spoken. "What do you want?" He asked finally. "You have won. You have broken our fleet and invaded our homeworld. Do you intend to destroy us as we destroyed others? Will you become the new tyrants of the galaxy?" Nathan shook his head. "That is the difference between us," he said. "We did not come here for revenge. We came here for justice. And justice is not the same as vengeance." He gestured, and his soldiers moved to secure the chamber. Council members were escorted from their seats, not roughly, but firmly. Guards were disarmed. Communication systems were disabled. "The Galactic Council is dissolved," Nathan announced. "Your fleet is destroyed. Your subject worlds are in rebellion. Your time is over. But we will not exterminate you as you exterminated others. We will not enslave you as you enslaved others. We are going to do something far more radical." "What?" Mavroth asked. "We are going to let you live," Nathan said. "We are going to give you the chance to be part of something new. A galactic federation where every species has an equal voice. Where power comes from cooperation rather than domination. Where the strong protect the weak instead of exploiting them." He looked around the chamber at the assembled species, both conquerors and survivors. "It will not be easy," he admitted. "There is too much history between us. Too much pain. Too much hatred. It will take generations to build real trust. But it can be done. It must be done. Because the alternative is to become exactly what we fought to destroy." For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then, slowly, Ambassador Kethra rose from her seat. She was the only council member who had warned against underestimating humanity. She was the only one who had seen this coming. "I will stand with the humans," she said. "Not because I am afraid, but because they are right. We built our power on suffering, and it was always going to collapse. Perhaps now we can build something better." Other voices began to join hers. Not many at first, but enough. The old order was dying, and a new one was being born in its place. And at the center of it all stood a species that had been given 12 days to surrender or die, and had chosen instead to change the galaxy. 1 year had passed since the fall of the Galactic Council, and the galaxy was still learning how to breathe. For 50,000 years, every species had lived under the shadow of the Council's power. They had been told what to think and where to go and how to behave. Now that shadow was gone, and many did not know what to do with their freedom. Secretary General Patricia Cole stood before the assembly of the newly formed Galactic Federation and looked out at a sight that would have been impossible just 13 months ago. Representatives of over 500 species filled the Great Hall, including survivors of those the Council had tried to exterminate, and even former Council members who had chosen to join the new order. They argued and debated and disagreed about almost everything, but they did it as equals rather than as masters and slaves. "Thank you all for coming," Patricia said, and her voice was carried by translators to every corner of the chamber. "I know that many of you still have doubts about what we are trying to build here. You have seen empires rise and fall. You have watched the powerful make promises that they never intended to keep. You have every reason to be suspicious of anyone who claims to want peace." She paused and looked around the chamber, making eye contact with as many delegates as she could. "Humanity did not destroy the Council to take its place," she continued. "We did not spend 2 centuries building weapons so that we could become the next tyrants. We did it because we looked at the galaxy and saw a system that was rotten to its core. A system that was based on fear and exploitation and the belief that some species are worth more than others. We believed that system had to end, and we were willing to die to end it." A Torvan delegate raised one of his massive hands. His name was Ironheart, and he had been one of the commanders in the battle against the Council. He had watched his father and his grandfather and 4 generations before them live and die as slaves. He had every reason to hate everyone who had been part of the old order. "And now that it has ended," he said, "what prevents humanity from simply becoming what the Council was? You have the most advanced fleet in the galaxy. You have weapons that can disable any ship ever built. You have allies who owe you their survival. What stops you from ruling through force as the Council did?" Patricia nodded because it was a fair question. "Nothing stops us," she admitted. "That is the truth. If we wanted to become tyrants, we probably could. But we choose not to. Not because we are better than anyone else, but because we have seen what tyranny creates. We have studied the history of the Council. We know that every empire built on force eventually falls because you cannot rule people through fear forever. Eventually, they stop being afraid. Eventually, they fight back. As we did." She gestured to the charter displayed on the screens around the chamber. "This federation is based on a simple idea," she said. "Every species has value. Every voice matters. No world can be conquered or enslaved or exploited. Disputes are resolved through negotiation rather than violence. And if any species, including humanity, tries to dominate the others, the rest have the right and the responsibility to stop them." "Words are easy," Ironheart replied. "The Council had laws, too. They simply did not follow them when it was inconvenient." "You are right," Patricia said. "Which is why we build safeguards into the system. No single species controls the Federation fleet. The command structure rotates between different worlds. Weapons technology is shared so that no one has an overwhelming advantage. And most importantly, we established a principle that the Council never accepted." "What principle?" "The right to leave," Patricia said. "Any species that wants to withdraw from the Federation can do so freely. There is no punishment for independence. No retaliation for disagreement. If we truly believe in freedom, then we must accept that some will choose to be free of us." The chamber erupted in discussion. This was not how empires worked. This was not how power maintained itself. The idea that a galactic government would simply let its members leave was almost incomprehensible to species that had lived under the Council's absolute authority. But that was exactly the point. Later that evening, Patricia stood on the observation deck of the Federation's new capital station. It had been built in neutral space, far from any single species' territory, as a symbol of the new order. Through the massive windows, she could see ships from 100 different worlds coming and going. Crystalline Velkari vessels docked alongside massive Torvan freighters. Human cruisers shared berths with Kreeth scouts. The traffic of a galaxy learning to work together. Admiral Nathan Price joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her, and they stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars. "Do you think it will work?" he asked. Finally, Patricia took a sip of her coffee before answering. "I think it has to work," she said. "Not because we are certain to succeed, but because the alternative is too terrible to accept. If we fail, if this Federation collapses, then the galaxy will return to what it was. Endless war, endless conquest, species rising and falling in cycles of violence that never end. Some would say that is simply the nature of intelligent life," Nathan said. "That we are destined to fight and conquer and dominate. That peace is just a pause between wars." "Some would say that," Patricia agreed. "But I have never believed it. I think we are capable of more. I think that given the chance, most beings would choose cooperation over conflict. They just need to be shown that cooperation is possible." She turned to look at him. "When the Council threatened Earth, most of our experts said we should surrender. They calculated the odds and determined that resistance was futile. Do you remember what you told them?" Nathan smiled slightly. "I told them that humans do not calculate odds. We calculate costs. And I told them that the cost of surrender was our souls." "Exactly," Patricia said. "We chose to fight not because we knew we could win, but because we knew we could not live with ourselves if we gave up. And somehow, impossibly, we won. We won because we found allies who shared our values. We won because we offered hope to those who had none. We won because we believed in something bigger than survival." She looked back out at the stars. "That is what the Federation is," she said. "It is the belief that we can be better. That we can build something that lasts not because it is strong, but because it is right. It will not be easy. There will be setbacks and failures, and probably wars. But as long as we hold on to that belief, as long as we keep trying, we have a chance." Across the galaxy, beings of every shape and size and biology were going to sleep for the first time without fear of the Council. Children were being born into a universe that was dangerous and uncertain, but also full of possibility. And on 1,000 worlds, in 1,000 languages, the story was being told of how a young species from a small blue planet had looked at a galactic empire and said no. They called it the human spirit, the refusal to accept defeat, the stubborn insistence that tomorrow could be better than today. It was not unique to humanity, but humanity had reminded the galaxy that it existed in all of them. That spark of defiance, that ember of hope. And as the stars wheeled slowly past the observation deck, Patricia Cole allowed herself to believe that the future, for the first time in 50,000 years, was truly open, not determined by the powerful, not controlled by the few, but waiting to be written by all of them together. That was the legacy of humanity, not conquest, not domination. Just a simple message delivered to a galaxy that had forgotten how to dream. You do not have to kneel. You do not have to surrender. You can choose to stand. And when you stand together, even the greatest empires can fall.